I do have kind of some schedules to announce here for the next several weeks, because I'm going to be gone for the next 2 Sundays. I'm going to be in the office parts of both those weeks, but I won't be in church on both those Sundays. So August 1st, next Sunday, Kelly Bissinger is going to lead this class. And Kelly, you know, he's on, well, is it ESD's board? He's on different boards where they're making policies, and so he has an insight into LGBTQ issues, critical race issues, as it impacts education in Oregon. So he spoke in the men's group a couple of months ago, and I thought it was quite interesting what he had to say. So I asked him if he'd be willing to do my Sunday school class next week. He said he will. He is flying back from Alaska on the Saturday before Sunday, coming in the evening. So if his plane got delayed or something like that happened, then we'd probably cancel Sunday school. But the plan right now is that Kelly will do Sunday school next week. And then the week after that is August 8th, and we won't have this Sunday school class on August 8th, okay? So just make a note of that if you can. August 1st is Kelly Bissinger. August 8th, we're just going to be off. I hope today to finish the subject that we're dealing with, so the August 15th, 22nd, and 29th, we're going to switch to climate change and talk through some of the issues related to that. And then September 5th, we will again not have this class because we won't be here, because that's family camp weekend. So registration for family camp starts, I believe, today in church. And so if you're planning to attend family camp this year, get out there and sign up. Okay? So anything else good of the order today? I need to return this to Ardith. Since it's in my hand, I should do it now. Okay, today in our notes, and again, I think we perhaps can get through these notes today and finish this topic, but where we left off last Sunday is that we began looking at feminist pro-abortion arguments. So that's where you should be in your notes. And we introduced the first of those last week, which, just to make sure, do you all have notes? Anybody? I have a few copies of notes if you need them or if you want them. Okay. Well, maybe, I'm sorry, I don't have them. So you just have to listen along. But those of you who have your notes, just to make sure that we're all in the same place, tell me what is the first of those arguments. Again, we're looking at feminist pro-abortion arguments. So find that section in your notes. And what's the first of those arguments?
Personal autonomy.
Personal autonomy. Eddie Gunther can follow along in his notes. I'm not sure about the rest of you. I haven't had a lot of response here. Are you all asleep today?
Yes.
I kind of feel that way too. There's something in the room that just sort of seems like we all need to go up to Pilot and get Bill Porfili's special brew of coffee, which we were discussing earlier. So, all right, so personal autonomy, that's the first of these. And the second one is a fill-in, isn't it? Okay. So personal autonomy, let me just review that briefly. Here's a statement from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which I think states the position well, and it states it, I think, accurately, because she is in favor of, she would support this. So this is the other side in their own words, which is always the fairest way to critique an argument, is to let the other side speak. So she made this statement years ago: "It is essential to a woman's equality with man that she be the decision maker, that the choice be controlling. If you impose restraints, you are disadvantaging her because of sex." And so, of course, the choice that she is referring to is a woman's right to abort the preborn baby. And so that is the argument of personal autonomy. What does the word autonomy mean? A law unto yourself. I've heard someone say that before. Yes, self-rule. And so this argument, and it's the first of these, but I think it's the primary argument, honestly, is they are simply saying that women need to have absolute sovereignty over their bodies, because that is the only way that a woman can have equality with a man and to be a decision maker in her life. In terms of, so of course, if there's an unwanted or an unanticipated pregnancy, then that might cause problems going to school. It could cause problems with pursuing a career, and so forth. And it couldn't it? Right? An unwanted pregnancy for a young woman really could cause problems for her pursuing an education or pursuing a career. And therefore it disadvantages her vis-a-vis males, and therefore to have a fair playing field, she needs to have the right to abort the preborn baby. So I think that's a fair way of stating that argument. What would be our objection to that argument?
Proverbs 31, the last half of Proverbs 31, that to me, a woman of great resources, children are not an hindrance. They're just an additional act of life.
Okay. So Proverbs 31 and what it says about the woman in Proverbs 31. Were you going to say something, Marcia?
Yeah, if a woman doesn't want to have a child, she should do something to prevent the pregnancy, not to avoid the pregnancy.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm.
They have abortion clinics. Why don't they have clinics to tie women's tubes or do something physically to prevent them from having children instead of murdering the child with their parents?
Of course, the 17-year-old high school senior, I think that person would push back on what you said and say, well, I do want to have children. I don't want my tubes tied. I just don't want to have children right now. I want to wait until I finish school and in a more stable period of my life.
Reverse that procedure. No.
Oh.
No?
Okay.
I mean, there have been inconvenient pregnancies from the beginning of time, and there will be to the end. So you can't sterilize everyone. I think that our society, though, does not put value on mothering, and that you're not somebody unless you're climbing the career ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were, I don't know, I think this side of heaven, we're not going to get this, that mothering is a beautiful and very high quality.
Yeah, our culture clearly, we see this, right? It's much bigger than just this issue. Our culture is trying to erase all differences between men and women, right? And to say that there are no differences. And what you're saying is that there are differences and those should be celebrated rather than dismissed.
It's such a downer in our society. It's so frowned upon instead of celebrating. Like, look what women can do.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing.
Do you ever, I actually have this experience. I'm a little bit surprised when I see a pregnant woman. Now do you ever think that? I mean, I just don't see that many pregnant women. And maybe that's just I don't get out enough. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not observant enough. But it does seem like we are having a lot fewer children than we used to. Right? It's for a lot of folks it's like 2 and done. We're not reproducing ourselves. Do you realize that? We need to have a birth rate, I think, of about 2.2 to replace our population, and we're at 1.6. So, and when you think forward, you know, to social welfare programs and so forth, that is a big problem if you're not replacing, because of course the young generation is paying for the older generation to go into retirement, and so if you don't have enough workers, there's huge problems there. So, but there's a lot. I mean, all of those trends are connected to these issues of devaluing childbirth and stripping away actually traditional differences between men and women. But still, I haven't heard the major thing that is wrong with this from the pro-life perspective.
It's a life.
It's a life.
You're like saying it's inconvenient for me to have a baby. I mean, kill a baby. It's inconvenient for me to have a husband. And you heard my husband. It's inconvenient for me to have whatever. That inconvenience needs to go away for whatever reason. There's no end to this argument.
Yeah, and the number of euphemisms that are used in the abortion debate, such as women's reproductive health. You know, that's the way that's the way the other side refers to abortion. It's a health issue. And, you know, it's pretty unhealthy to the unborn child, right? And so in almost all of these kinds of conversations, there's something that is just absent. There's something that is missing. There's someone that's just not on the radar screen. And to acknowledge that at a certain level, I mean, just to be blunt, it's hard for me not to say that it sounds pretty selfish to say, for my own personal convenience, I'm going to kill the unborn child in my womb. And I'm not meaning to just dismiss all of the difficulty that can create for a young woman. And I think our culture needs to do much more to help young women in that situation, or older women for that matter. But it is just wrong of us to make this a discussion as if it only involves one person and one person's welfare. So for autonomy, it means that the child has to die.
I think it's sad. Probably the majority of abortions occur among poor people and also minorities. And of course, the abortion rate for African American women is horrible.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that is kind of sad. There's kind of a promise there. If you have an abortion, your life will be fine. And I would guess that they continue to plummet into the same long decisions.
Yeah.
And women who are well off would have abortions, you know, everything will be fine. And then suddenly it hits them when they're in their 50s and 60s, how empty their lives are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's no free lunch, and abortion not only obviously hurts children because it kills them, but it also hurts women who have abortions. And obviously, you know, not every woman is probably going to have the response you're describing, but many of them do. And many of them live the rest of their lives with regret and just the issues of having an abortion. And that's actually where the gospel can speak into a woman's life and, you know, do her a great deal of good. Because the gospel reminds us that, you know, God, through Christ, forgives us of our sins. Also, just as an aside issue, from the social justice warrior perspective, it is kind of interesting. If you remember the concept of intersectionality, and probably you don't, but we have talked about this. We do understand an intersection, right, on a road, where roads come together at the intersection. And so intersectionality is this idea that the world is divided into two categories. There's the oppressor and the oppressed. And the more of these intersections in your life that are in the category of the oppressed, the more rights you should have and the more voice you should be given. Does that make sense? So if you are a woman, you're oppressed, just by definition, because it's traditionally been a patriarchal culture, so if you're a woman, you're oppressed. If you are on the LGBTQ continuum, you are oppressed, because that's the ideology says that you are. If you're a minority, you're oppressed. And so these intersections are coming together in your life. So if you're white, male, and Christian, like I am, I really shouldn't have a voice at all, because I'm the ultimate oppressor. And I should just, in great shame, get super glue and glue my lips shut and sit in a corner. And if I talk at all, it would be to apologize for my race and for my patriarchy and for my arrogance. And I'm not making this up. I mean, this is reality. And when I talked about this before, I pointed out the absurdity of this at some levels. So I said, consider the charismatic male senior citizen who's living in a single-wide trailer on Social Security. Now, he's an oppressor, because he's white, male, and Christian. Whereas the black, lesbian, Harvard professor is oppressed because she's black, lesbian, and woman. Does that make any sense to you? Not really. But the point I'm getting at is that if you buy into those categories, and that's critical race theory and intersectionality, the unborn child's got to be on that continuum somewhere, don't you think? The unborn child has no voice, no rights. The unborn child is just dismissed. So there's a lot of intersections right there coming together. So what about, we mentioned minority children. What about the black female unborn child? Based on their own ideology, that child should be protected because it's part of that category of the oppressed. But instead, we don't protect it, we just snuff it out and put it to death. So I just think that's an interesting way of looking at it. And of course, I've not heard anybody make that argument, but I think it is a valid argument based on just taking the ideology and just sort of reversing it and saying, well, doesn't the unborn child fit somewhere in this discussion? I'm sorry, someone is going to...
I think there's a category for seniors. Seniors, to me, are probably in the final oppressed part. They don't count that at all.
Yeah, ageism. Yeah. All right, so that's the argument of personal autonomy. The next one is unrestricted sexual freedom. I mean, I just think realistically that is part of this discussion. So feminists believe that women should not be disadvantaged when it comes to sexual promiscuity. Men are not burdened or threatened by an unwanted pregnancy as women are. And therefore, fairness demands that a woman be liberated from a forced pregnancy. Now, there's part of what I read is obviously true, isn't it? And we know that throughout history, there's a lot of men who've gotten women pregnant and then just walked away. And in that scenario, the woman pays a heavy price, doesn't she? She has to carry that baby for 9 months, and then after giving birth to it, she's responsible. And I mean, there's a reason why when Father's Day comes around in the prison system, from what I've read, there's not a lot of interest among the inmates, you know, sending out Father's Day cards. But when Mother's Day comes around, that's a different story, because Mom gave birth and Mom was there and Mom raised me, and the dad was a deadbeat and he just deserted the whole situation. And so, you know, I mean, we need to be sympathetic and acknowledge that biological difference, because you know what? Biology does matter, doesn't it? There's an irony in this, of course, because the woke social justice crowd tells us biology doesn't matter. Biology is no longer scientific. But biology does matter, and women bear the brunt of carrying, birthing, and raising children, particularly in those early years. And so we acknowledge that. Birth control is the first offense, and abortion the second. From this perspective, the unborn child is viewed as an invader or an unwanted parasite that must be purged from the woman's body. Now, maybe that's a bit harsh, although some of the language does read that way, but I obviously acknowledge that there are women that choose to have an abortion, and they don't view the unborn child as a parasite. They view it as an inconvenience, and the timing is wrong, and they perhaps, you know, they grieve even going into that procedure. But to have a fair playing field, you know, birth control and abortion is viewed as making that field fair. What's wrong with this argument?
Separate the sex appropriation.
Yeah, from a Christian worldview perspective, everything is wrong with this argument, isn't it? Because what is implicit in this argument? That sexual immorality is not sexual immorality, right? That just the lifestyle that that most people are living today, and they are, aren't they? Aren't they? And it's not just outside the church, it's in the church. I don't do a lot of weddings, and one of the reasons I don't do a lot of weddings is because the church has a policy, and if people come and they say, want you to do a wedding, and let's assume here that they're both professed Christians, and after talking for an hour, I don't start with this, but we do get to the policy, and I ask the question, are you sexually active? And they say, yes, we are, we're living together, and I say, I can't do your wedding. I just can't, I'm sorry. And that's based upon Scripture. It's also based upon the fact that I will not do a wedding I don't believe in gay marriage. Now, there is a hypocrisy that reeks to high heaven in churches that'll tell two gay people, I won't do your wedding because the Bible says I can't. But then the next couple comes in and they're living together and the pastor says, well, I'll do your wedding. Do you see the hypocrisy in that? It's massive, and that's common. And so, you know, we're living in a culture now where everybody is living together, and so we acknowledge that, but it still doesn't make it right. And so this is an argument that is basically saying sex out of marriage it's basically statistical morality. Do you understand what statistical morality is? It's just I make the decision of what is right and wrong by just counting noses and what is everybody doing. So as I've said before, if 9 out of 10 third graders cheat in school, then cheating is normal behavior, and if it's normal behavior, it must be good behavior, because people are basically good. So whatever their normal behavior is must be good behavior. Now, from a Christian worldview perspective, we say, well, no, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. You know, we're broken people, we're sinful people. And so by nature, we do things that are just simply wrong. But statistical morality says, well, if 9 out of 10 people are living together outside of marriage, that's normal behavior, it's right behavior. And we have to say, well, no, the Bible doesn't say that. And so this argument of unrestrained sexual freedom is, from a Christian worldview perspective, there's just all sorts of problems with this. I should finish this sentence, though. Denying abortion is viewed by feminists as an act of violence against women by a male patriarchy that is committed to reducing women to objects to be conquered and colonized by men. That's a quote from Carl Trueman. And he's just reflecting on the more militant literature. That is the language that is found in the more militant literature of radical feminists who view men basically as the enemy, it would seem. Yeah.
I mean, doesn't it seem like, you know, at one hand, it's like you're trying, when you with an argument like this, feminists are trying to have their cake and eat it too, so to speak. So, you know, on one hand, in that sentence, they're affirming, you know, a male dominance, so to speak, right? And it's almost like the only way that they can reclaim it is by having the right to abort. When in reality, we can affirm women's dignity and really, you know, giving them a controlling decision by saying, you know, at the very beginning of the whole process, you have great value. There's great value in motherhood. There's great value in your, you know, in your virtue. You know, and it's almost like all of that is denied, you know, or forgotten. And it's almost like, and the argument says the only way to reclaim all of that stuff is to have the right to, you know what I mean? It's a very strange argument from that perspective. There's so many of these things, the value of women and their virtue in motherhood that everyone can affirm. But all that is forgotten because you know, it's sort of like we're reclaiming some of this by having the decision to abort at the end of the process, you know. It's a very great argument.
Yeah, so much of what you've said is really, you know, a counter-argument that is coming out of a Christian worldview and a Christian understanding of women.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that's been sort of a light that's come on and more in my mind as I've been teaching this class and doing a lot of reading and just thinking through these issues, on all of these issues, it just, everyone I study, at the end of the day, it seems to me, the victims are always women and children. It just seems that way. And I think with the sexual revolution, the victims are women. You know, we've liberated, we've disconnected sex from procreation. We've said, if it feels good, do it. And the biblical morality was just oppressive. And we've just removed all of that. And yet I'm pretty convinced that in that arrangement, women are going to be the victims a lot more than men. It's just the nature of the difference between men and women, and that's not being acknowledged. And so it's not only that women get pregnant and men don't, but I think it's also just the way women and men approach sex, and there's differences there, and I think women are just going to get hurt. And it's just really sad, but I think it's true.
But also, I think it's a little deeper than that, because I think most of the Marxist ontology that devalues human life, period. If you this is good to be done, non-prohibited, and all that. And of course, women and children are a part of that.
Yeah, of course, the Marxists would say we value human life, but we don't value it equally. You know, if you're in the category of the oppressed, then we value that life more than we do others. This is off the topic, but it's, why not? So in the Soviet Union, have you ever heard of the kulaks? The kulaks were a group in Tsarist Russia. You know, you're talking more of a, what was the economic system? You had, it was more like serfs and lords. You got the large landowner, and then you've got all these serfs under the landowner, and they're virtually slaves. And then these people had tough life, no doubt. But as Tsarist Russia is coming more to a conclusion, there's this group called the kulaks. And the kulaks were starting to rise. They were small landowners. They were farmers. They were very industrious. They were very hard workers. Maybe the beginnings of a middle class. And so then the communists take over the country. And they divided everybody into, you're either oppressed or you're an oppressor. And they based that on, you know, are you successful or not? So the kulaks were having some success because they were good farmers and they were really hard workers. And so they're small landowners, they're not wealthy, but they've elevated themselves. So what did the Soviets do? And they came in and killed them by the millions. I mean, they just massacred them, exterminated them. And then what happened? Mass starvation. Because they killed this industrious, hardworking, productive, successful segment that was emerging within their country. They knew how to grow food. They killed them all off. And in the 30s then, you had people dying by the millions in the Soviet Union. And of course, like all totalitarian societies, what did they do? They covered it up. And we only know about this largely because of, you know, some reporters who were able to get in and get the word out. But so the kulaks were of less value because they were successful, and therefore they were put into the category of oppressor, even though in reality these were people who had, through really hard work, had pulled themselves up out of, you know, poverty. So, and that could happen today, honestly. I mean, or something like that. With some of the dynamics in our culture right now, it's kind of scary. If you're successful, you're an oppressor and we should punish you. Yeah.
I just finished plowing through the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, and the whole time I was reading it, it was written in, I think he finished it in 1967. But as you read the whole history of the oppression of people in Russia, the attitudes of the oppressors is exactly the same attitude as the people now wanting to change things.
Yes.
Because I was just going back and reading God's curse upon women in Genesis 3, and you know what? That hasn't changed. Women, more so now, are up against men, and that's what God was saying.
Mm-hmm.
When it says you will desire your husband, he's essentially saying that you're going to be always fighting against him. And the whole thing about it, this curse, this is just a culmination.
Yeah, and what Kathy just made reference to, so in Genesis 3, you have that statement, your desire will be for your husband, all right? There'll be pain in childbirth and your desire will be for your husband. And so that phrase, what does that mean? That has been a source of difficulty, some controversy, and disagreement. But it is really interesting that in chapter 4, so that statement's in Genesis 3, in chapter 4, you have Cain and Abel. And Cain, of course, is on, he's on God's bad side. And how does that statement go? Sin, God says to Cain, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. It's the same verb. It's the same basic statement as in Genesis 3, your desire is for your husband. And so a person might read that initially and think, well, the woman's just head over heels for her husband, right? Her desire is for him. But probably, based on how that verb is used in Genesis 4, and actually the person who makes this argument is actually a woman. She's an Old Testament scholar, and I first read the argument from her, which adds a little bit of credibility because she is a woman. Her argument is, no, Genesis 3 should be taken the same way in Genesis 4. It's a desire to control. It's a desire to rule over. Because that's what sin wants to do to us, right? Its desire is for you. Its desire is to have you, to possess you, to master you. And so if you give the same meaning in Genesis 3, then what it is saying is that one of the results of the fall is that there will be conflict between men and women in the marriage relationship, right? And it's not just simply saying that's the woman's fault. It's saying it's both of our faults, right? But by what the next statement in Genesis 3 says about the man. But, I mean, that's true. So a lot of what we're talking about here, the critical race, the feminism, critical race theory, all of this takes something that's dangerous because given our brokenness, we have these divisions to start with. Men and women have a hard time getting along together. Different races have a hard time getting along together. And these ideologies just pour fuel on that. And then that's something I think really dangerous to do. So instead of saying that in Christ we're brought together. All right, the third argument, children should be wanted. Which again, they should be wanted, right? So the argument here is if the woman doesn't want the unborn child, it's not fair to the child, and so the child should be aborted. So while agreeing that all children should be wanted, this argument still misses the point. God does not give a mother the right to kill her unborn child just because the child is unwanted or an inconvenience. The problem with this is if you just start to apply this logic down the line. So would we apply this same logic to a postborn child or maybe to a toddler? Because there are women who don't want their toddlers, correct? Because we do occasionally, and it's always horribly tragic situation. It's sometimes connected to deep issues that I don't, proclaim to understand. But we know sometimes women will kill their kids. You hear those stories of sometimes she kills herself too, drives the minivan into a lake and kills the whole family. Or sometimes she poisons her children or she kills her kids. So, I mean, should we really take the position that, well, she didn't want those toddlers and so she didn't want them, so it's not fair to have those children in a world where they're not wanted by their mother and they're not loved. So, I mean, I don't think anybody would say that that's, well, there are a few people, but I don't think sane people would say that. And I think also most mothers will desire their child once they greet it after birth. And if they don't, there are situations where adoption is it's never the first, but sometimes it is the best option. So children should be wanted. Yes, they should. But Wayne Grudem writes, this is a bankrupt moral argument, one that so devalues human life that it is a mother's convenience more highly than the right of the life of a child made in the very image of God. Any other thoughts on that?
The same direction as euthanasia, really. If the child is unwanted, or the person is not deemed as valuable, then they should just be destroyed.
Yeah.
So you get old enough and you can't function, you're now, if you're an 85-year-old, 90-year-old man who is just, well, not waiting to die, but you're not able to add to society, you're not able to work, so you can't help society, so you should just kill yourself. It's the same argument, it goes the same direction. Right, yeah. I don't want you out to eat you, Grandpa, so I'm just going to...
Yeah, and of course, ultimately the Christian worldview is saying that every human being from conception to natural death is created imago Dei in the very image and likeness of God. And every human being, without exception, has value because they are created in the image of God. Okay? And we either believe that and live out of that, or we don't. And of course, our culture isn't living out of that.
I wanted, just for, I got a chance to be part of the Pregnancy Care Center for several years. Not recently, but in the past. But just to affirm the good work that those places do, because, my understanding is so many of the time, or the majority of the time, it's a young lady that comes in, is really just afraid and almost in a sense hyperventilating about what am I going to do? How am I going to tell my parents? How am I going to take care of it? It's not even a question of there's a life inside of me or any of that. It's not. It isn't an intellectual argument for little gal at that time. It's a matter of what something real has happened, and now what do I do? And I think pregnancy centers have so much value to offer, where you have older women there who can just help the girl slow it down a little bit, and let's take them through some of this stuff. It's really, really valuable.
Yeah, and I think, thanks, Dan, for sharing that, because we do need to, in the course of making all these arguments, we need to remember that we're dealing here with human beings, and human beings who oftentimes very much are terrified, and they don't know what to do. And in the midst of all of this, we need to have compassion and to recognize that they are in a situation that they are terrified. And how do we help them make a good decision and not just simply condemn them, especially if they make what we would say is the wrong decision, And then the other thing is just that, you could probably make a really solid argument that pregnancy care centers have done more to curb abortion than all the politicians combined throughout, politically speaking, we haven't got a lot accomplished, but the pregnancy care centers have done tremendous work and tremendous good.
Because they're loving the girl at the moment she needs.
Yeah. And I think probably, this is a generalization, I'm sure it's not true in many situations, but I do think that there are women who volunteer at those centers who some of those women have been in that situation themselves. And so, yeah, so they've been there, done that, and
God redeems all of that. It's such a beautiful picture of redemption in all of that.
Yeah. And last week, I think we mentioned the Supreme Court justices and kind of where they fall on this issue. So I was thinking about that a couple days ago and thinking, boy, people, don't put all your hope in the Supreme Court of overturning Roe v. Wade. I think I'd fall over if they actually did that. I'd faint. I do think there's some possibility of more restrictions, but I think politics matters. We need to vote, and the Supreme Court matters. But we have been so disappointed by politicians and by the Supreme Court. So, Veronica.
Well, getting back to the children should be wanted argument, if that argument is valid, then a person like me doesn't deserve to live, because my biological mother didn't want me. I was an inconvenience. And so really in that argument, my life didn't matter. My sister's lives didn't matter. None of us were planned. None of us were wanted.
Yeah.
You know?
So you weren't wanted, but your mom didn't abort you.
No, because my grandmother convinced her.
Okay.
That was not the right decision.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. We were wanted by my grandmother. Our life was valued by my grandmother.
And so, I mean, this could get very personal and very hard and very emotional for you. But so on the one hand, you have to live with the burden of this thought, my mother didn't want me. And that's a heartache that you have to bear. But I'm assuming you're thankful to be alive.
I am.
Right? Okay.
I'm thankful for all the...
So we have a living, breathing person in the room who wasn't wanted by her mother, but she saw life, and she's grateful to be alive. And so I can assume, I think, that a lot of children who were aborted because they were not wanted by their mothers, if they were alive and could speak to us, they would say, I'm so thankful that I'm alive. But they can't say that because they were killed. Fran, do you want to say something?
When I was a teenager, my parents told me they did not believe in abortion. Tell me why. Using the Bible, my mother stood there and told me if I became pregnant and did not want the baby, she would make me have the baby, take the baby, and kick me out.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's good parenting. I don't, yeah. Yeah. So she did well to say life is important, abortion is not an option. Although she didn't do so well in terms of, I mean, if I had a daughter who was in that situation, I would love that daughter.
Well, she would take care of me while I was pregnant and everything, but if I didn't want that baby, I couldn't abort it.
Mm-hmm.
She would take the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And because I didn't want it, she would kick me out.
Yeah, see, I wouldn't kick my daughter out. Yeah. Yeah.
Support me, but they would take the baby over me.
Yeah.
It was just...
Although having said that, there have been situations where I won't get into those in detail, but I've had to say before, there's the door, go through it. I have done that with, and anyway, there are times when I think parents, sometimes we are too soft with our kids, honestly. I think that's a problem. I think sometimes showing a kid a door can do a kid great good. But I wouldn't kick, let's move on, okay?
She wouldn't actually physically do it, but I don't know, I didn't have her respect afterwards.
So the last of these, the fourth of these arguments, Christians shouldn't impose their moral standards on others. Now, I think we've all heard that before. We've also heard the phrase, you don't hear it so much anymore, but you can't legislate morality. Remember that phrase? Isn't that, I mean, I remember growing up, I've always heard this statement, the professor says, ask any question you want, there's no dumb questions. You realize how untrue that is? There are lots of stupid questions, okay? That doesn't mean you shouldn't ask them. Ask any question you want, and if it's a stupid question, I won't tell you that it is, but there are stupid questions. There are also stupid statements, like you can't legislate morality. That is an incredibly stupid statement, because almost everything we legislate has moral aspects to it. I mean, if you put someone in prison because they've broken a law, aren't you legislating a standard of right and wrong and morality? But you do hear that. And so kind of connected to that, Christians shouldn't impose their moral standards on others. So, so Christians should just sort of huddle in a corner and let everybody else talk about what's right and wrong, and yet Christians just shouldn't even have a voice. So people who make this objection usually say it's fine for Christians to think that abortion is wrong for themselves, but they have no right to try to force that conviction on others who do not share a Christian viewpoint. There's a lot of liberal politicians who use a form of this argument, don't they? I mean, they'll say it's, you know, personally I wouldn't have an abortion, but I don't feel that I have the right in terms of, I mean, I'm a citizen, but in terms of my role as a politician, I don't have the right to tell others what to do on this issue. So in response, it must be said that many of our laws are based on moral convictions that are held by the vast majority of the population. How about laws against murder? Are based on the moral conviction that murder is wrong. Laws against stealing, the moral conviction that stealing is wrong. Laws against polygamy and incest are based on the moral conviction that those things are wrong. Laws against sexual harassment or adults having sex with minors are based on the conviction that those things are wrong. And we could simply multiply those examples, you know, by the hundreds and thousands. And so all the time we're saying that this is wrong, not just for me, but it's wrong for everybody. And so we're going to legislate because it's wrong. But now with abortion, it's like we can't do that. It's just, to me, it's just sort of nonsense. Yeah.
So the statement you read there, just flip it around and change it up and just say, you know, heathens shouldn't impose their moral standards on others.
Yeah.
Why isn't that a true statement?
Say that again. Did you say heathens should not
Yeah, heathens. Just replace Christians with heathens.
Should not thrust their morality on everybody else?
It's still a true statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just as much validity as the one that's on the paper.
Yeah.
Right? And then the other thing is that all these laws that we have things against, why? Why are there laws against murder? Where did the idea come from that murder is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, the whole list. Where do these ideas come from that these things are wrong?
Are you waiting for me to answer, or do you want to give us the answer?
Yeah. Sorry, I've been in this C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, they obviously,
How do you know a crooked road's a crooked road?
yeah.
Because there's a straight road. There's something else out there that you are contrasting it to.
Yeah. Yeah, and ultimately, you know, from a biblical perspective, there's a knowledge of God implanted in our hearts. And so we have Scripture as well. But even apart from Scripture, you know, Paul says in Romans 2, when people who do not have the law do the law, it reveals that the law is written on their hearts. And so God has implanted a knowledge of these things, of His existence and of His moral law in our minds and in our hearts. And so we all know that there is a standard outside of ourselves, and there's just massive denial on some of these issues of all of that. But that's also Romans 1, right? Suppress the knowledge of God. Push these things down. And so, you know, really this goes back to the brokenness of the human heart, the brokenness of the human condition. And really it all makes sense from a Christian worldview, as sad as it is. A little bit more. Which moral standards support laws against abortion? I think there are two. Number one, people should not be allowed to murder other people. I mean, that is, we just can't give up that argument. And number two, the preborn child should be considered a human person and should be protected as a human person. So murder is wrong, and the preborn child is a human being. And therefore, to take that life is also wrong. Okay? We have a little bit farther to go, so I failed with what I said when we started, that we'd get through this today. But I don't want to rush through this last little section, a philosophical pro-abortion argument. This is coming from Peter Sanger, who is a ethicist at one of our Ivy League schools. And I just want to, take 15 minutes or so to go through this argument, but we're out of time. So I think we'll just table that and come back next time and we'll finish that. I do have a statement here about a one-issue voter. I don't think anybody's a one-issue voter, honestly. Are you a one-issue voter? I've never met one. I think we all vote for a variety of reasons. I'm not a one-issue voter, but I will say this. I cannot imagine voting for a national candidate who's pro-abortion. I just can't imagine ever doing that. Because to me, this is the most substantial moral issue of our generation. And so it is a distinguishing issue for me. And if you're, I could never vote for Joe Biden. I just couldn't. I would have to violate my conscience to vote for Joe Biden. I can imagine a situation where I wouldn't vote, or I'd write in a candidate like Mickey Mouse, or I might vote Dan Vanderstelt for president. I mean, I could see that, but I could not vote for Joe Biden because of this issue. And in his situation, it's even worse because Joe Biden claims to be a godly, religious man, part of the Roman Catholic Church. And he consistently, with both fists, gives the church the middle finger. That's a bit crude to say it that way, but that's reality. He is living in defiance against the law of his own church, which really means he should be under church discipline. I just can't do that. And I realize that there are people in our church who do not agree with me on this, because I've had a few conversations with folks. I don't know if anybody in the room here right now, but I do know that not everyone agrees with me on that. But that's where I stand on this. If abortion isn't evil and wrong, then I just don't know what would be. And if a person is so morally compromised as to think abortion is permissible, then I don't think that they have the judgment to be in high political office. So, okay, so we're going to close a little bit early, actually. We're closing on time. We don't normally do that. But I'm going to ask David Bashirs, would you